The Department of Health has found that 1 in 6 Australians have a drug addiction and 1 in 10 have an alcohol addiction. This means that there are more than 2 million people suffering from addiction in Australia alone. Dr. Fergal Armstrong, addiction medical specialist, is our guest today and is joined by Dennis, who has been challenged by addiction throughout his life. I'm Ian Bunston. Welcome to Monday Matters. Welcome, Fergal. Great to have you back again.
Thank you for having me back.
And Dennis, it's also great to have you as a guest too.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Fergal, let's start with you. In 2020, around 2.6 million Australians had an addiction to drugs or alcohol. This number is up from 2.1 million in 2017, an increase of 25%. Why do you think this is so, and is it a continuing trend?
Well, we have to acknowledge the impact of COVID on everything, but certainly on addiction. That really amplified people's use of substances or alcohol to relieve anxiety and stress. And then we have to understand the underlying reasons for addiction. I mean, the Gabor Mate, a very famous author on the subject of addiction, has written, "Don't ask why the addiction, but ask why the pain." I think you really have to understand people's pain to understand their addiction first. And that pain can come from trauma as a child. I mean, we know that childhood maltreatment is very common. We also know that it really does increase your risk of addiction. And it can come from trauma, during adulthood as well. And then there are psychosocial factors like psychosocial adversity, poverty, a lack of social connection, a lack of togetherness, a lack of love, a lack of opportunity. Then there is the effects of the drug itself. Some drugs are more addictive than others. For instance, tobacco, nicotine dependence. Nicotine is the most addictive substance known to man, much more addictive than anything else, including heroin or alcohol. And then we have to accept the genetic heritability of addiction. And we know that roughly 50% of the predisposition to addiction is inherited by various combinations of genes. Now, that's not to say there is one single gene for addiction. There's over 100 mutations that are responsible for the heritability of addiction, and they operate on different levels and for different drugs. So to summarize, we have to take into account the genetics, the drug itself, the psychosocial context, including trauma, and we have to also acknowledge COVID.
And in terms of recent times and the work that you're doing, have you seen an upward trend in the number of addictions and people being challenged?
Well, yes. I mean, we have to understand addiction in the context of dependency versus misuse. So a lot of people will end up misusing substances as a maladaptive coping strategy. But they don't necessarily demonstrate severe dependence that the people who are unable to stop do. And in both cohorts, the numbers are going up, the prevalence is going up. And why that is fundamentally, I think that life is harder, the cost of living is higher, and we are living in a more and more fragmented society with fewer opportunities for social connection, and the social structures that the previous generations would have depended on just aren't there anymore. We don't volunteer as much as we used to. We don't have the social connections. The churches aren't, for some, the church attendance is going down. And the church attendance and things like that are not being replaced. And then I have to, discuss the effects of social media. Social media has changed the way we view social connection, harmfully.
So, Fergal, treating those that are impacted by addiction, I believe, is an extremely challenging role, and you're doing it day in, day out. What motivates you to continue doing this?
Well, there's always the
Oh, I'm glad you might have mentioned that.
well, very early on in my career, I met a patient who responded very quickly to treatment. And I thought the treating addiction was easy, and that easy win has sustained me through this journey. And really, what has transformed my view of addiction recently is is a realization that no matter how smart you are, no matter how rich you are, no matter how well read you are, and I'm including myself in this, it is the absence of love that basically fractures people and fractures minds and causes addiction. And the only thing that can cure it is love. And so actually understanding what that means for people, for me, has kind of been the challenge in the latter, in the more recent years of my career. As a young man, I used to be fascinated by the concept of, what's the right drug for this disease? And that it's all limb flam. The key thing is understanding causes, lifestyle, and it all boils down to social connection and love. I can't put it any more simple than that. And that's what keeps me going, the love of people around me.
Fergal, I believe that you're in the process of writing a book about identifying addiction symptoms in ourselves and others. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if that's the case, tell us about it. I'm really interested.
Well, it's not about how to identify addiction. I think people have a fairly good idea what that is, but it's about how to help yourself and others when you find yourself in addiction, and what are the practical steps that you can take to to overcome addiction. And if I can summarize that, it's a healthy mind and a healthy body, and all of the lifestyle factors that I have previously discussed almost ad nauseam in your previous shows. The diet, the exercise, the smoking cessation, the sleep, stress management, and the social connection. And then it delves into the specific habits that allow people to challenge their own addiction. Things, symptoms, or sorry, things in that include having a journal, having a healthy habits board, spending time with non-drug using peers, spending time engaged in meaningful activity, and spending time in religious observance. These are the key behaviors that will help people recover. And it's a fairly linear relationship. If you don't do it, you're shoveling the proverbial uphill. If you do it, life becomes a little bit easier, and you tip the odds in your favor. And it's very simple. A lot of people have made careers and PhDs out about how to cure addiction. The bottom line is hang out with people who don't use drugs, volunteer, and engage in social connection. Find your source of love, and then think about it.
So, Fergal, before I let you go and bring Dennis into the conversation, we've used the word connection and the social connection. Okay, can you just drill a tiny bit further to tell us what's actually happening, maybe physiologically or whatever it is in the psyche that actually helps us when we've got that connection to take us towards that road to recovery?
When we have a meaningful conversation with someone who gets us, who understands us, and who wants to know us, as opposed to the "Are you okay" day when you walk past your boss and he looks at you and smiles and says, "Are you okay?" And the only appropriate answer is, "Yes, sir. 3 bags full, sir." I mean, those are two different conversations. But when you have a conversation with someone and you really feel connected to that individual, and you feel as if they want to hear your story and they want to understand you and your pain and your suffering, when that happens, you get a release of oxytocin, which is a love hormone. And that's the same hormone that is produced in mummies' brains when they deliver babies. The oxytocin is fundamental to human survival because it creates maternal bonding with babies, without which we would never survive, without which we'd all be dead. The human race wouldn't exist. We can get that same oxytocin rush by having a meaningful conversation. And that oxytocin rush, the hormone oxytocin, has a wide range of physiological functions, including wound healing, including reduction in pain, including reductions in depression and improvements in mental health. But the magic of that is that not only do I, as the person who needs the conversation, not only do I get that oxytocin rush, but so too does the other person. they get the oxytocin rush as well. So when someone looks at you and says, "Do you want to chat? Are you okay?" Don't ever worry about taking too much of their time, because they will get as much oxytocin as you do, and they will benefit from that as much as you will.
Again, if that's all right, I'll just ask you again.
Yeah.
So Dennis, do you know why you actually started drinking? Do you know what prompted that?
Yeah, Fergal touched on quite a few things that can sort of cause these patterns, and I sort of identified with a couple of them, but probably the main one for me, I think, well, there was certainly a big element of genetics in it for me. I come from there are a lot of alcoholics in my family, so that was definitely would be a part of my pattern.
So this is very brave of you, and I've mentioned this for you to share your story. So where are you at now, and what are you doing to address your issue?
So at the moment, uh, my disease progressed. I'm sort of in my early 50s now, and by that age, I was about 40. I became an everyday alcoholic. About 12 months ago, I sort of made I guess, more of a conscious decision that, or a realization that I needed to change. So, I'd love to say that I came to that realization and, the sun burst through the clouds and I've got 12 months of sobriety, but that's not my story. I've had some really good periods of sobriety, some really solid periods there, but it has definitely been sort of two steps forward, one step back. I've had a few sort of relapses, slip ups, whatever you might want to call them, including one sort of fairly recently. But my general trajectory in the last year has definitely been upwards, and so yeah, I've got. I think you asked sort of what I've been doing to sort of get to
Yeah.
at least where I am. So um, much of what Fergal was saying actually is working for me. So the most basic thing that I bring into my life, and when I do this, I tend to make better choices. Is There's just some basic structure. So I plan my day fairly meticulously. I write it down. I've got certain. I concentrate on physical, mental, and spiritual, and I have certain things daily, weekly, and monthly that I try to achieve. And I write it all down, and I plan it, and I tick it off as I go, or at the end of the day. And just that basic structure tends to give me a little bit more sort of self-discipline and a little bit of accountability, I guess.
Mm,
So that works.
yeah. And as we've heard, Fergal's talked a lot about connections
Yeah.
with how has this played out in your life?
Yeah, I realise now how important that is, because I was very much, I'd isolated myself for a long time. And a bit over 12 months ago, I didn't grow up with faith, but I found a church community that's been really, really important to me. I've built a lot of really good relationships and friendships within that community. And the very first time I went into this church, I sat down before the service started, and there was a big sign flashed up: connections, a new faith-based group starting for people struggling with addiction. And I thought, okay, well, I'm meant to be here. So that's obviously where I met Fergal. And so that connections group once a week has been really important as well.
So I guess it's supported you and it gives you a sense of accountability as well, would you say?
Yeah, yeah, accountability, but it's more along the lines of what Fergal was saying before, just that space that you can go and be open, and you know that you're not judged, um, and you're heard. And it's, like I say, with addiction, you do definitely uh, isolate yourself. And so when you start to learn to be open and bring these things out and say them to another human being, it's it's really helpful.
So, what would you say to others who are facing similar challenges to you?
Um, that you don't need to be alone, that there are opportunities, whether it's a church, whether it's AA, whether it's, there's countless avenues that you can seek, where and it's not easy at first, like to be open about your struggles, but once you do it, it is a big it's a big load off your shoulders, and it gets easier. So I would just say, whatever, there's a multitude of things that you can try, as I say, whether it's AA, whether it's, you name it, just give it a go.
And Fergal, you've obviously Dennis, and you've been observing his journey and where he's going. How do you feel the connection between you two? Tell us about that.
Dennis is my friend. I love him. That's how I feel about it. I mean, I'm just a bloke in a group, and we share our problems. There's no, I don't believe, I certainly hope that Dennis does not feel that I feel that there's some kind of hierarchy in that. It is a circle.
Hmm.
It is a place where we can connect.
Hmm. So Dennis, when you are at connections, you obviously feel very much in a safe space where you can express, can communicate, can have dialogue, conversation, and that obviously you found that that has helped as far as your road to recovery. Do you feel?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, you know, I'm learning to be open about my struggles, but also the other people in there that are dealing with what they're dealing with, to be able to listen to their stories as well. That creates trust, that people can be so open, to one another. And so that trust leads to you probably being even more honest. And and as Fergal said, I think it's probably a win-win for everyone, to be able to listen and feel compassion and understanding, and not judging anyone for whatever they're saying or whatever they're going through or expressing. Yeah, it's super helpful for
And
everyone.
yeah, no, that's wonderful. And I know that I'm just jumping back a tiny bit here, but we heard Fergal's example of his hole-in-one experience, one of his first patients, which is incredible. It's not always the hole-in-one experience for a lot of other folk. And so there are times when there can be relapses and we can fall back. But then at the same time, do you feel like there's still enough hope and encouragement for you to continue on?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I started to sort of build or become a part of community, when I was just sort of isolating for the sort of 10, 12 years, excuse me, I would, occasionally attempt to become sober, and I always crashed and burned after a couple of weeks, and it would be a year or two before I sort of tried to get sober again. Whereas now, the couple of relapses I've had in the last 12 months, they're getting shorter and shorter, because I've got that community around me, and I've been open and honest with myself, and that little bit of knowledge, and that little bit of sense that there is a better way to live, has definitely, as I said before, even though I've been a little bit up and down, my general trajectory in the last 12 months has been uphill by a long shot.
Mm. And Dennis, look, there may be a lot of people that will be hearing your story after this event when it goes out to social media. If there was something that you could say to encourage that person that is struggling, that is finding a difficulty, the road ahead of them, what would you say to them, do you think?
Oh, look, um, I would probably say you just need to take that first step. Because once you do, and it's not easy, and you know, if you're anything like me, there will be setbacks, but just taking that first step, your life will slowly start to change.
Mm. Well, Fergal, can I just say it's always a real privilege to have you on our program, Monday Matters, and you always bring so much very interesting and helpful information to our discussion. And to have you today with Dennis, and Dennis, thank you for you're courageous to share your story and to have it. You've made yourself very vulnerable, and we really appreciate that. And to have you both here as guests at Monday Matters has been a real privilege. And I'm sure that this message, this conversation will go out to many and will be very helpful indeed. So thank you for being part of our discussion this morning.
You're welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.